The global automotive industry was already in trouble before COVID-19 swept across the world. The trade war, environmental concerns and the search for future motoring among many other things that were already weighing on sales. And as the economic shocks from the coronavirus pandemic continue to reverberate throughout the global economy, S&P Global Ratings forecasts light vehicle sales of 70 to 75 million in 2020. That's down 15 to 20% from last year. And that's now at the lower end of the ratings agency's base case scenario. The slump in South African new vehicle sales slowed in May as the dealerships resumed some operations after a lockdown aimed at curbing the spread of the coronavirus pandemic was partially eased. Domestic sales fell 68% last month from a year earlier, and that's compared with a record drop of 98.4% in April. The National Association of Automobile Manufacturers of South Africa's data is slightly encouraging. I suppose these monthly declines do resemble what we saw in the downturn in 2008-09 through the global financial crisis. However, back then, production and public life didn't largely come to a halt. Now, the global auto industry faces obviously many challenges, suboptimal capacity utilization and therefore a rough road ahead. So how will the local automotive industry get out of this unprecedented crisis, and will there be major structural changes? Well, let's welcome our panel to find out. Mike Mabasa currently serves as Chief Executive Officer at NAMSA. He's a transport economist and journalist by training. He's got considerable experience in the aviation industry, and he currently serves as chairman of the Air Services Licensing Council too, which is a regulatory body under the Department of Transport. We've also got Mark Demise, who's chairperson of the National Automobile Dealers Association, also MD and shareholder of North Motor Group and Dealer Council Chairman of the Honda Dealer Network in South Africa, and Faisal Mkhizi, who's currently the ABSA Group's Managing Executive of ABSA Vehicle and Asset Finance, and it's a role that he took up after 3 years serving the bank as Managing Executive of Retail and Business Banking in KZN. Now, Mike, the expansion of South Africa's car manufacturing industry is really central to government's economic development strategy, but the coronavirus crisis has forced car makers into survival mode, and the concern is that it could push ambitious growth plans out of reach. Some industry officials have said that the government needs to defer some tax payments for the motor industry and relax the criteria for investment incentives and allowances, or the pandemic could deal the sector a permanent blow. Does the industry require further government support at this stage?
Thank you very much, Michael. Look, I think definitely, without doubt, I think we've seen in many markets around the world, if you look at the United States, you look at Germany, you look at China, you look at Japan, all those markets have already introduced the stimulus package that supports their automotive industry. And there's no reason why South Africa cannot. In fact, this morning we just had a meeting of our office bearers as NAMSA to be able to discuss this very same point. And we've agreed that we certainly need to be able to approach government so that we can be able to put together a stimulus package, a proposal that we can be able to put before government. And our view is that that stimulus package is not necessarily about funding only, but we can be able to look at other policy levers and use other regulatory instruments to be able to enhance our capability to can be able to, amongst other things, and most importantly, stimulate demand for local vehicles, because we need to be able to stimulate demand for cars in South Africa so that we can be able to encourage current car buyers not only to focus on buying second-hand vehicles, because that's where the trend has moved, where people are now going into second car buying market as opposed to brand new vehicles. So we are going to be putting together a very compelling business case to be able to have a conversation with government to say, how do we stimulate demand for vehicles in South Africa so that more people can be able to buy and own brand new vehicles.
Just give me an example of what some of those non-financial policy levers might be to help stimulate demand.
Well, amongst other things, what we're looking at, obviously, is tax deferments. Because remember, the industry is contributing quite significantly towards the fiscus of the country. We pay tax, whether you're looking at it through the lens of VAT, whether you're looking at it through the lens of levies. There are a lot of levies that we pay, whether it is ad valorem tax that we pay, that we pay, obviously, for bringing all the vehicles into the country, amongst other things, as part of our import duties. Whether you're looking at carbon tax, I mean, we're paying now quite a significant amount, towards carbon tax, which we also need to be able to look at. So our view is that we're not saying we don't want to honor those obligations, tax obligations, because we also recognize the fact that government is also under pressure in terms of making sure that they are able to collect as much tax as possible as they can. So we're saying defer some of those tax payments, at least give us a breathing space for the next 3 to 4 months, maybe 6 months if we can, at least up until the end of this year, so that we can be able to make sure that we're able to, breathe a little bit easier. Some of our manufacturers, for example, have introduced also fantastic products into the market where people can be able to buy cars, but they will only start paying for those vehicles in 2021, primarily because of the fact that we are recognizing the fact that a lot of our consumers are under pressure, and we need to be able to put together products that can be able to bring them back and stimulate this demand that we want to put on the table.
And then you throw into that pot, Mark, to bring you in here, the fact that many of the car rental companies that we see, Hertz in the US and what's happened there since filing for bankruptcy, if you look at the stock price, you would think it's a different story, but operationally it's filed for bankruptcy. We've got a lot of those cars coming into the market, creating a bit of an oversupply in those categories. But broadly speaking, what are you seeing from the dealership perspective in terms of impact so far as we've exited into level 3?
Thank you, Michael. I think, it's been clawing our way back very slowly. May was obviously a very, very tough month. We only really started trading halfway through. And dealerships are still nowhere near breaking even, I think. I think it's going to take at least till about July, August before dealerships start climbing out of the hole because of their heavy costs. Opportunities, however, as you rightly pointed out, these rental cars coming back into the market, there really isn't a rental business in South Africa or the rest of the world for the time being. And that's going to represent a really good opportunity for consumers out there to buy 1 or 2 year old cars that are very well maintained and a good value proposition. And linked to Michael Mabas's point, I think if government's going to put a stimulus program together, it must be on cheaper new cars. I think that bodes very well for low interest rates and first-time buyers into the market, and let's empower these people to be able to buy their own car.
From that perspective, Faisal, what has the impact of the lockdown been on the vehicle finance industry? Is it realistic to expect a rebound from these levels?
Good question, Michael. So we've seen the stress really from the consumer point of view. A good example is that, for instance, in our base, that almost 42% of the people that we finance over the years have asked for what we call a payment relief or payment holiday for a period. So what it means that to get an opportunity at least to have a 3 months of breather while the economy stabilizes, and some of these individuals that we're dealing with perhaps have not been working for a period as a result of the lockdown. And some of them, because of the industries they operate in, those industries were not allowed to trade. As a result of that, there was no generation of income opportunity. So, and I think the stress has been there, but we remain optimistic. And obviously, I mean, one has to look at the numbers that are coming out in June and end of May as the lockdown relaxations started to come through. And I must say that we feel a bit optimistic that while the situation is going to be tough for a little while, but there's some green shoots that are very encouraging in terms of the buying patterns that we're seeing out in the market. So we remain optimistic, and the future looks a little bit brighter.
Mike, from an industry perspective and representing the OEMs as you do, they have committed to South Africa through various iterations of policy certainty. We've had automotive industry development programs that have provided the kind of certainty that business loves, to make long-term capital commitments to the country. What happens now to that? If car makers are struggling for liquidity thanks to the crisis, how does that impact on some of these ambitious targets that have been set out through our motor industry development program?
Well, look, there's no doubt that it will have an impact, Michael, without doubt. I mean, we've committed and we've launched, for an example, the South African Automotive Master Plan towards the end of 2018, primarily to be able to get to a place where we can double our current production capacity. Because as you recall, South Africa is currently producing around 630,000 cars per annum. We want to be able to move that 600,000 odd to 1.4 million vehicles every year. with the current situation that we find ourselves in, unfortunately, some of those ambitious plans that we have put in place will be impacted upon. And this is why we need to be able to have conversations across the value chain so that we can be able to make sure that those plans are not going to be killed, but certainly we can be able to revive them as we go, adjust them as we go, so that we can really be able to make sure that we can continue to stimulate our ability to industrialize South Africa. Because as soon as we are able to up our production numbers above 1 million, as we are waiting in the next couple of years, obviously that's a very good story for South Africa, because we'll certainly be able to create more jobs for South Africans, because the economy, as we all know, is currently under a lot of stress. We are under a recession. We need every job we can be able to keep and obviously create, so that we can really be able to make sure that we are able to get our economy back online.
And that is an important conversation to have, because if you're asking government for tax deferral, it's effectively taxpayers as well that you're asking for some kind of deferral, and they would want to see what the quid pro quo return is for the broader South African economy. And that has to be further investments and new jobs and stimulating a sector that so far has delivered on all of those promises. Mark, coming back to the dealers, clearly, you have to be creative through a time like this. And we saw all kinds of trends pre-COVID-19, virtual showrooms. They seem to be a little bit on the periphery now. What has happened? How are dealers responding creatively to the crisis?
I think dealerships are really looking at value for customers and trying to get them into new cars. At the end of the day, the economy works on new car sales. It's a classic benchmark that most people use to measure any economy. So there's some very, very good and clever and innovative deals that dealers are doing with banks in terms of deferring installments over this difficult period. And also highlighting good value and low cost of ownership of cars. So that's quite exciting. And I can tell you right now, it's a really good time to buy a car now in the next few months, because unfortunately, with the rand depreciation, we are going to have an inherent amount of price increases coming through the system. That will take some time. So there's a lot of stock on rubber right now, and that probably will be 10-15% cheaper than it will be in the next 2 to 4 months, despite even though the very good news of the rand coming back. So that's great news. The rand hovering at about 16.60 or so at the moment, even yesterday going under 16.50, which does bode well. But a very good time to buy a car today, actually.
And considering that as most consumers behind a house, second most important purchase that they've got to make, I think a very important consideration. We've just got to leave it right there. We're talking about how COVID-19 has put the skids on the car industry in South Africa, but encouragingly from what we're hearing is there are some green shoots starting to emerge.